Hey folks, Nathan here from the Star Wars Timeline Gold, Star Wars Beyond the Films, and the Star Wars gaming podcast Cloud City Casino, which you can find at StarWarsReport.com. Bringing a look at some recent releases here for the Star Wars RPG. This time we're taking a look at Star Wars Force and Destiny, not Forces of Destiny, that's the cartoon, the adventure module known as Ghosts of Dathomir. This is a long-delayed, different adventure module to finally give us some more combat mechanics and whatnot, and sort of take us into the darker regions of some of the Force users out there, particularly in this case, back to Dathomir, home of the Night Sisters. At least home of the Night Sisters that we know from the Clone Wars and from canon. It does tend to follow that line, although again, this is an RPG line that does blend aspects of canon and legends at times, so you have sort of an odd mixed continuity. This one leans much more heavily toward canon, though, than legends, if that matters to you. Essentially, the gist here is that what you've got is this Night Sister tribe that winds up discovering a thing called the Nardithi cluster. And it's basically this weird stone spiky cluster that somehow seems to be resonating with the Force. And it's like when beings die, it's like it's drawing in their Force energy. It's just this weird extreme vergence in the Force. It's sort of a dangerous artifact. And a group of Dathomiri Night Sisters decide to basically splinter away from the regular Night Sister group and cluster around that cluster, so to speak, creating sort of a splinter group. And that group winds up eventually running afoul of a corporation that's trying to exploit the planet, eventually bringing down a ship that is part of that corporation's command structure there at Dathomir, and in the resulting crash, a lot of people die, the cluster becomes very, very powerful, but there's great damage, parts are lost, and a piece of it is fragmented away. Well, that piece, years later now, has found its way into a piece of art. It's been built into a little statue that's now going on sale, but the person who was selling it was really hyping up the Force connection, and now it has gone missing, along with him. And your heroes are out there to try to hunt down what happened, to rescue him, but in the process, they're going to run afoul of a Hutt Khadijik, a Hutt clan, that winds up pursuing them mostly through Act 2. They're going to find themselves having to actually go to Dathomir at one point. They're going to face off with all kinds of adversaries trying to get their hands on this powerful Force artifact, not least of which is Jercera. You may notice the lightsaber here. Yes, she is not just a former Night Sister, not just someone who has a background that sort of ties back into that splinter group, but also someone who is now an Inquisitor. And she has sort of taken it upon herself in this era around A New Hope to hunt down this artifact that she thinks of as kind of part of her heritage. And along the way, she becomes the primary adversary for our characters and introduces a new Force power to us. So your book's going to be divided into general sections here. You have your opening crawl. You then have your introduction, your overview, game prep, the Force power we'll look at here. And then 3 episodes, we have Inquiring Minds, which is primarily on Toydaria, Deadly Visions, which is going to be primarily a chase, trying to get away from the Hutts, and then Echoes of the Past, which is going to take you actually to Dathomir. So both Toydaria and Dathomir get little sort of mini gazetteers here in the book, in case you're wanting to ever play there. The new Force power that is available is called Jercera's Influence, and it's basically a Force power that's kind of like a mind trick, but it's designed specifically to induce fear in your opponents. So those who want to sort of tread that line between light and dark and use fear to influence behavior, well, now you've got a specific Force power exactly pointed in that direction for you, which is something that's kind of nice, but kind of, again, kind of threading towards the dark side there for those who want to try to stay on the light. But maybe you could find ways to induce terror to good ends, right? Maybe the ends justify the means, but boy, that's a question for another time. But it makes for an interesting new Force ability to introduce into Force and Destiny, particularly for our heroic characters. And it's a fairly well laid out campaign with a very clear villain who, of course, you're going to have to confront by the end. But it is, as expected, with an adventure module, just the adventure. Not a lot of extra mechanics or anything else introduced into the game. If you do want information about Toydaria and Dathomir, they're there. If you want to use Jercera, perhaps, as a villain in some other campaign, okay, go for it. But understand that as an adventure module, it is a self-contained story that it's up to you to find a way to somehow weave into the adventures of your crew. But of the ones so far for Force and Destiny, this is one of my favorites, though honestly, the Force and Destiny campaign adventure modules have tended to be the ones that I preferred out of all three of the Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars RPGs. So if you're looking for another new adventure for Force and Destiny, and you're all about those Inquisitors perhaps, this is one to check out. Ghosts of Dathomir has finally arrived.